Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. I'm your host Terry. So it's I guess Thanksgiving Eve. I'm just out running some errands. I did something I'd never done before yesterday. I went to Fort Detrick, Maryland. I had to give my daughter an ID card, and it was interesting because even though that base or that post is really close to my house. Well, not really close. It's 45 minutes to an hour depending on traffic, but it's just a base that I'd never been to, had never had any reason to go there. Certainly been very close to it, but I never had any reason. But I had to make an appointment. You can't just walk in unless you're active duty. You can't just walk in and get an ID card. I actually got a new ID card too, even though I didn't have an appointment for myself. The dude that was there was cool, and we got there early, so it worked out good. But the crazy thing is that base just seems deserted. There was a lot of cars parked there, and maybe it was because it was the middle of the workday, kind of. But it just seemed deserted, which was kind of the vibe that I got when I went to McGuire Air Force Base about 4 years ago, when my cousin retired from the Air Force. It was like this enormous base, but it just didn't seem like there was that much going on. Maybe I was just used to naval bases where everything's really compact. Naval bases typically aren't, they don't have a ton of room. Like if you went to the naval base in Norfolk, it's just jam-packed with stuff. Same, like North Island or just some naval air stations or whatever. So anyway, it was just interesting. And then, yeah, I got to go back there because my wife's like, oh, my ID card's expired too. I was like, okay, I didn't know that. And then mine, I have to go back in like 2 years to get it replaced. And this was kind of weird, but when I first retired, and maybe other guys that watch this have had this similar experience, but when I first retired, I had no expiration date on my ID card. It was indefinite. But then for some reason, maybe it's because they put a barcode on the back or something. But I had to get a new ID card, and I don't even remember where I got that. But then they gave me an expiration date of like 2027. Well, then when the guy did my new ID card, and it looks totally different, different format and colors and stuff. But when he did my ID card yesterday, he gave me the same expiration date, and I was like, well, why do I still have the same expiration date? And he's like, oh, well, that's because when you turn 65, you'll come back and get an ID card that is indefinite. So I don't understand that, but I guess they're like, well, somebody hits 65, they're gonna die before the ID card wears out or something. I don't know, but I just thought it was weird that I originally had an indefinite. Then I got one with an expiration date, and then I'll go back in 2 years and get another indefinite. It just seemed like a waste of time, but what can you do? It's the government. So, yeah, speaking of the government, I saw this article that 550 drivers were placed out of service in California recently for ELP non-compliance. And I've said this like a dozen times, but I'm just gonna keep saying it because maybe somebody will hear it where, you know, somebody will come upon one of my videos and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's true what he's saying. But I don't know how it is, you know, like if you have an hours of service violation, right? The way to cure that is to put a driver out of service. If it's a 70-hour clock, then you can put them out of service for 70 hours, right? If it's a 10-hour break violation, then you put them out of service for 10 hours and then it fixes things, right? But how is it that you can just put somebody out of service for an ELP violation? It seems stupid, because it's not like how long is that out of service order in place? I mean, if they don't speak English, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 2 weeks, right? It might happen in 6 months, but I don't understand how putting somebody out of service is really doing any good. Either don't bother with it, which might have been the reason that we weren't bothering with it for so long, is because the solution was totally impractical and didn't even address the problem. But those drivers, like that truck, you know, needs to be impounded, and those drivers need to have their license mutilated, for lack of a better term. Like, and the reason I mention that is that when I would get a new license, like when I first got my CDL, I didn't have a tanker endorsement. So I got a tanker endorsement because one company I was at asked drivers to do it. I was like, okay, I can do it. And because even though I ran drive-in, there might have been something where a customer wanted a tanker endorsement. So anyway, I got a tanker endorsement. Well, when I got the new license, all they did was take a punch and punch a hole in my old license and then gave it back to me. But I wouldn't have been able to, you know, show that to a cop and them say, oh yeah, you're good to go, right? That license is basically void when it's punched like that. Well, if the police are not doing that, DOT is not doing that, and then contacting the state where this person was licensed and saying, hey, this person's license needs to be suspended for, you know, pick a number, right? 90 days, 180 days, until they can prove English language proficiency. But it just seems stupid to just say, oh, we're putting you out of service. Because what happens when all the people at the weigh station go home? The person's just going to get back on the road, still not speaking much English. Again, there are enforcement actions that are probably taking a toll, no pun intended, but it's not enough, because again, trucking is one of those businesses where you can basically operate a criminal enterprise and do pretty well at it, and do it right under the noses of law enforcement. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox about that. So here's a question I ask in the title to this video, and that is, what does Prime Inc. have to hide? And let me preface this segment of this video by saying this, because people always comment. I don't have a particular axe to grind with Prime, because I've said this before and I'll say it again. There are a lot of things that I enjoyed at Prime. It was good for me, you know, in a lot of regards, until it wasn't. And, you know, then we just needed to terminate the contract. And I'm so glad I lost some money doing it, but I'm glad I did it when I did. But anyway, I don't necessarily have an axe to grind with Prime. as much as Prime is a huge player. And anytime, and you know, if you watch my videos, you know I've talked about dozens of different trucking companies. But I have friends at Prime, and they tell me things and give me information and stuff like that. So one of the things, and this happened a little while ago, so this isn't super timely, but they quit doing their Friday safety meetings. And I used to call them the pep rallies because, you know, it was just this show. And they broadcast it on the internet live for I don't know how long, certainly years. And I made fun of them on a number of occasions because, you know, they just did stupid stuff at these safety meetings. And there was a safety meeting that I didn't do a video about it because I didn't want to go back and try to find it. But they used to play the safety meetings in I think it's the Millennium Building where the cafeteria is. And like, I was there eating one night, and I just heard this guy on the safety meeting saying stuff that I was like, you know, that really sounds like sexual harassment. And, you know, I know there's a lot of knuckle draggers that are like, oh, that's overblown. And I was just like, I wasn't watching, I was just hearing what they were saying. And I was like, you know, as an attorney, I probably could have used that in some case against Prime. And I have talked about the fact that they would say some monumentally stupid things in these videos that were really creating liability for them, and certainly would have been used by attorneys in cases against Prime. But for some reason, they first went away from allowing the public to see these broadcasts live. And then, you know, they sent out this message, and I'll show you the message that went out because I got it from a friend. Okay, so that message says that they don't have enough viewership. But that was always true. I'm not sure that somebody at Prime didn't finally go, hey, you know, this Tim Travels dude, and I'm not taking credit for this, but I'm just speculating here a little bit. Hey, this Tim Travels dude used to be a lawyer, and he thinks we're morons, you know, for doing these things and saying what we say. And, you know, the company does have a GC, a general counsel. I mean, I'm not sure what level of expertise this guy has, but he's a lawyer. And, you know, it really just seemed like no one that, you know, had, like, there was an adult in the room was watching these videos. And I will say that they just seemed to get worse when Dennis Davis took over safety. When Steve Field was there, they were more, I guess, professional. And I'm not saying it was Dennis Davis personally. I'm saying that when he took over, the tenor of them seemed to kind of change. And it just got more and more like just a sales presentation to whoever was listening. And that's why I started calling them the pep rallies. And, you know, they wanted to come off like they were this great company. It was constant, you know, it was just a constant stream of people getting up there and saying how awesome Prime was, and how if you were at Prime but you weren't killing it, it must be because you are messed up. So I always objected to him from that standpoint. And by the way, when I was in the Navy, I hated stuff like that too. Like, you know, in the Navy, we'd call it a dog and pony show. I hated doing stuff for show. I hate form over substance. And I think these safety, you know, meetings being live streamed was just that. But I also think that they realize that they need to shut up. And so now it's internal to the company, and you have to basically get a link. And that does a couple of things. One is they can now monitor who is seeing their videos. And they also probably have some protections in place where the person who clicks on the link that's sent to drivers is under some obligation to treat the safety meeting and the video that accompanies it and whatever they're talking about as proprietary information, like trade secrets. Almost creating a duty on the part of the viewer to not share information about it. And I don't know if that's because they just took a look at it and said, we're really, risking getting hammered by this. Because, like, remember the time where there was the guy that basically admitted that he was driving on his significant other's clock when he ran a stop sign, and Dennis Davis, like if he wasn't a part of the cult, I'm pretty sure he would have been fired for that. But they use cult members to make sure that they can control the narrative. But that would have been a great video to just have a clip of if you were suing Prime because of an accident. But I just think that somebody either realized that there was a problem, or what I said could happen actually did, and they got sued somewhere. And in discovery, sorry, I'm messing with the power cord here. And in discovery, they learned that somebody was going to put into evidence stuff that was said by the company. Because you can't have that video where you have all these company officials getting up there and speaking on Prime's YouTube channel and not have what they say attributed to the company. In other words, the person doing the talking is an agent, and this is kind of legalese, but they're an agent, servant, or employee of the company. And there's this theory in the law called respondeat superior, where basically when somebody is within the scope of their employment and they do something, then that behavior is imputed to the company. Now, that normally is in a situation where somebody did something negligent, like they crashed into somebody. The company then is also going to be a defendant of, in the case. But in this instance, you have these people that, like you have your safety director saying something. Even if they're not directly involved in the case, they're going to probably get swept up in it. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand in civil cases. In civil cases, there is no, well, let me say it this way. In a civil case, somebody can assert their rights to not incriminate themselves under the Fifth Amendment. However, you cannot avoid testifying. In other words, in a criminal case, a defendant is not required to testify. They do not have to take the stand. But in a civil case, a defendant cannot decline to testify. They can get up there and assert their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. That's possible, and it happens sometimes. But a corporate representative, I don't know. I've never seen it, but I guess it could happen. It'd be an interesting case, but I don't think that they can assert the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination as to the company. There are companies that have been charged criminally. Arthur Andersen, the big accounting firm, was in the Enron case. It also put Arthur Andersen out of business. But you know, it's just, all this stuff is very interesting to me, at least. And if you're still watching, I guess to you, because this is a big company that said a lot of stupid stuff, and it's out there on the World Wide Web. And I checked just this morning, and Prime hasn't taken down all, you know, its previous videos. So a lot of the videos that I've referenced in the past, I think are still available on YouTube, which I think if they suddenly had this, you know, come to Jesus moment where they're like, man, you know, we're really stepping in it here, and we probably shouldn't be doing that. I would think, notwithstanding that, you know, there are probably people that recorded everything they ever said, but I certainly would take everything down, because that archive has damaging things in it, and it's just stupid to leave it up. But, you know, I don't know, you know, they're kind of asleep at the switch about some of this stuff. But I wonder if they're hiding stuff, if there's some litigation that, you know, what prompted this change. And I don't think it's because of lack of viewership, because you never know when you put out a video. And by the way, from looking at the videos that are on YouTube right now, it seems like they get between 1,500 and 2,000 views, but that doesn't count the live views. In other words, like if I do a live and it says that, you know, I had 50 viewers, that just means that the most amount of people that were watching that video at any one time was 50 people. And I'm not even sure if I've ever even gotten that high, because a lot of times you go live and people are busy, they're driving, they're doing whatever, and then they watch it later. Well, that's where those 1,500 to 2,000 views come from. That's not who watched it live. So I don't know why they would care, but I think that the idea that there's low viewership is the reason that they don't publicize this stuff anymore for anybody to see. I think that's probably false, because it doesn't make any sense. Because they never, like I said, they never knew what the viewership was going to be. And here's the other thing too, is they're still doing the videos. They just don't want anybody outside the company to see them, because they used to use it as a recruiting tool. And I knew people that watched them all the time. Like I've talked to people that would be like, yeah, I always watch the Prime safety videos. Like people that just love Prime, I guess. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you're at Prime, or you know somebody at Prime, and you have some insight into what I'm saying, and I'm happy to be, you know, if what I'm saying is totally wrong, I'd like to hear about that too, because I'll kind of do a retraction. I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to put out stuff that's, you know, bogus. And, you know, people don't necessarily agree sometimes, but if I say something's a fact, I usually have done, not usually, I've always done the research. I know it to be a fact. Opinion, that's a little different story. But I'd be interested to hear what people think about this, especially if you're at Prime, because it's a kind of a big, you know, public-facing change. So anyway, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Be safe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.